video I'm going back to basics with a from start to finish tutorial for a miniature granny square. Now, I have done a tutorial for a granny square blanket in the past, but it was some years ago and the camera I was using then didn't produce as clear an image as the one I have now. So hopefully today it will be a lot easier for you to see what I'm doing. So I've got my miniature crochet box here where I keep all of my supplies. And today I'm going to be using a 0.5mm crochet hook. And that is a number 22. And I'm using DMC's Special Dentelles crochet thread, and the thickness is number 80. And by using those it will produce a granny square that is 20mm square, and that is just over 3/4 of an inch. So at the moment I'm working on a mixed coloured granny blanket with a white border, and how I usually make up the squares is to choose 3 main colours. So there I've got the mint green, the yellow and the pink, and then I'll use the same colour for the centre and the 4th round, and then I'll border in white. Join them all together in white and then do a final border around the edge. Today we're not going to be completing the blanket, I am just going to show you how to make the square, but that's usually how I choose my colours. So I've chosen my 3 colours here. So I've got a nice cerise pink, a pale pink, and then a nice green just to break up the pinks. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so begin by making a loop in the end of your thread. So as though you're going to tie a knot, but just leave the centre open like that, and then you're going to poke the hook through the cotton there and then tighten it onto your hook like that. And we're now going to do a chain of 6. Now, some people actually crochet straight into that loop, but that's not really a technique that I'm familiar with, so I'm just going to show you today how I usually do it. So put your hook, let's pull that first loop out, so put the hook around the back of the cotton and then pull it through the loop like that. So that's 1 chain stitch. So 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Now I'm holding the cotton up here between my middle and ring finger there, but I'm not pulling too tightly, so I'm keeping it taut but not pulling on it too tightly. And I know that a lot of people do struggle with the tension, and it's difficult to sort of tell you how tight you need to pull the cotton, because obviously it's difficult to judge and everybody crochets differently, but you just don't want to be pulling so tight that as you're working the cotton is either squeaking on your hook or you're just having trouble always getting the cotton through the loops. So what we're going to do now is join that into a hoop. So put the hook through the first chain stitch that you made. We're ignoring this little tail bit for now, and we'll tie that in at the end. And then you want to pull the cotton through both loops on the hook. Like that. So we now have like a little loop made from chain stitches there like that. Now I've actually done a separate video on making middles or centres, because I think getting started is the most difficult bit, just because it's so fiddly at this stage and so small. But do persevere and do go and have a look at that video where I sort of go into a lot more detail on making the centres. So I won't go into all of that detail again this time, but one thing I do like to do as I'm crocheting is actually hold on to that centre with my thumbnail like that. Otherwise at this stage it just twists and turns and you're constantly sort of going into the wrong side and you'll end up with a sort of knotty looking centre. So what we're going to do now is crochet 4 clusters of 3 into this centre, and that will make up our middle. Now I'm not going to use the actual stitch names because I know that in different countries they're called different things. Now in the UK we would call this a double crochet, and I think in the US it's a treble crochet. So I won't sort of talk about stitch names as we're going along. I'll just sort of tell you what I'm doing. So to make the first sort of chain of the first cluster, we're going to do a chain of 3. So just as we did for the centre, 1, 2 and 3. So I'm just putting the hook behind the cotton and pulling it through. We're then going to go behind the cotton and into the centre of the chain loop that we just made. So let's do that again. So you've done your chain of 3, so you're going behind the cotton and through the centre of the chain loop. And here is where you need to make sure that you are actually in the centre and not going through a stitch. And really you just need to take a really good sort of look at it close up. And that's why you don't want to pull it too tight either, as you won't see that little central hole in there. And I'm trying to angle it so you can see it. Let me turn it around like that and get that onto the white there. I don't know if you can see, but there is a hole in the centre there where we put all of the, or where all of the chains sort of meet, and that's where you want to be going. So behind the thread, through the centre, like that. And you can sort of feel it with the end of your hook, although that may be something that happens sort of when you've been doing it for a while. But if you're just starting, just make sure you're finding that little central hole there and not going through a stitch. You then want to again pull your thread through the chain loop. So we're just going through the chain loop for now, like that. And that will give you 3 loops on the hook. You're then going to go behind the thread again and pull it through 2 loops. So you've got 2 loops left on the hook. And then you're going through the final 2. And that makes the first stitch, which we call a double crochet in the UK. And in the US it's a treble crochet. And I know that in different countries it's called one or the other. So we want 3 of those to make our first cluster. So we're going to go behind the thread again and do the exact same thing again. So through the centre of the chain loop, pull the cotton through the chain loop. So we've got 3 loops on the hook, behind again and through 2. So you're left with 2 again, and then through those final 2. So that makes our first cluster. So we've got 3 more clusters to do, which makes up that centre. And I'm going to show you one in a completed square, as it might be easier if you sort of know what we're aiming for. Let's get that nice white square that I showed you at the beginning. So this is the bit we're making now, this centre with those 4 clusters. And then the whole square is actually just made up of those clusters. So the granny square is a really nice easy one to begin with if you're just starting out with crochet of any size really. So let's pop that over there, and we'll now do the second cluster. And between the clusters, because if you think of this centre as like a little square and we've got 4 corners, so each corner we're going to make by doing a chain of 2. So 1 and 2. And then we're going to do the same thing again. So behind the cotton, through the centre, pull the cotton through the centre. So you've got 3 loops on your hook, pull the cotton through 2 of the loops, and then through the remaining 2. and that makes the first stitch of our second cluster. So that again through the centre, pull through, go through 2 loops and through 2 loops. There's the second stitch, and I'm sort of purposely repeating it and saying the same thing each time because then you'll sort of get used to what I'm doing. So through 2 and through 2. So we've now got 2 clusters. Now where you do that first one and you've done that sort of line of 3 as part of your first cluster, you'll always have a little bit of a gap. But don't worry about that, because as we sort of continue round, and certainly as we do our second round, it closes up. So you can then just see the 4 clusters in the centre there. So we're now going to do the next corner, which again is our chain of 2. 1, 2, behind the cotton. And now see how clearly now you can see the centre. So once you start working into it, it opens up a little bit and you can clearly see where you're going now. So through again, pull the cotton through, and as you're working, and I sort of do go into this a bit more detail in the crocheted middle tutorial, or making crocheted middles easy or something I've called it, I'll link to it at the end. Your work sort of tends to twist about, so sometimes, like you saw me do there, you may just have to sort of straighten it up again on your hook to get it so that the front is facing you all the time. And then this tail end, I just keep tucking it out of the way for now. So just sort of hold on to that with your middle. Okay, so through 2 and through the remaining 2. Behind the cotton, through the centre, pull the cotton through, 3 loops on the hook, pull the cotton through 2 and pull the cotton through the remaining 2. So we've got 1 more stitch to go for that cluster. So through 2 and through 2. We want to do a final corner. So a chain of 2, behind the cotton, through the centre, pull the cotton through, and see there what I mean about it getting twisted. So my sort of stitches or loops are going towards the back of the hook there. So I'm just going to sort of gently twist them around so I can see all 3 loops. And then go through 2 and through the final 2. We've got 2 more to do now to make up this final cluster. So pull it through 2 and through 2. Final one. Now when I get to the final corner, in the centre I just do 1, or for the middle I just do 1 rather than 2. And that's just because when you get to this final one it can tend to be a little bit loose. So if you do the 2, you're making a larger hole in that corner. So I'm just going to do 1 chain, and we're now going to join into the 3rd chain stitch that we did at the very beginning. So you just sort of need to find that with your hook, and that will then make it into the square. So I'm trying to sort of peer over the camera here. You just want to go through the 1 stitch like that, and that's the 3rd chain stitch that you did at the very beginning. Like that. You're then going to pull the cotton through, and that makes our centre. You then want to make the loop a little bit larger. Now if you were just doing a square in one colour, you would just carry on here, do your chain of 3 and then start again and go into the closest hole, which is where we just joined, and go around. But I always think granny squares look nicer if you use different colours, but depending on what pattern you might want to double, you know, colour in the centre, so do 2 central rows and 2 and 2, especially if you're just going to make one large square as a blanket. But for this one we are going to be using different colours, so I'm going to cast off now. So pull the loop out like that, hold on to it nice and tightly, snip your cotton and then go through. Pull it tightly, and I normally push that down with my nail. And I'm going to trim that off a little bit, just leave about an inch there, 25mm, but we'll be joining that in when we do our second row. We'll be hiding it and then we'll snip it off. So I did get a few questions about how you join in the ends. Now what I've sort of done in the past, and it does actually work, is just trim off the ends at the back of the square. But what I've actually started doing lately is tidying the ends in. So I crochet them in, so you're sort of hiding them behind the next cluster. And this is the back of the square, as you can see, and it looks lovely and neat. And then you can trim the end off, and it's caught in underneath 1 or 2 clusters at the back. Like I said, it looks a lot neater. And also there isn't any risk of them coming undone. Although I must say, when I do just trim them down, let me see if I can find a square where I have just sort of trimmed them down. Yes, that one there. So on this one I've just trimmed the ends down, so you can see little tufts of cotton left there, and that's how I've sort of always done it in the past, and I've never found that they come undone. So that is a safe way of doing it. And they are all hidden at the back of the square, so you wouldn't be able to sort of see them at the back of the square there. But in this tutorial I will be showing you how to catch them in at the back. So let's pop that one away. So with the cotton that was hanging off from the centre, we are going to crochet that in. Now to actually join in the threads at the back, I like to use a smaller hook. So I've gone down here to a 4mm hook, which is a number 24. So just slightly smaller than the one I'm using to crochet with. And it's just so that you don't stretch the stitches at the back of your square. So the cotton is coming across that way. So I'm going to put my hook through one of the loops at the back. Gone through 2 there, but that's fine, and then pull that end through. And you want to leave a bit of a longer end on that sort of first loop so that you can do this and actually hold on to it. So let me get that as I normally would the cotton. So you're going through sort of any loop at the back of the middle there, and then pulling the cotton through as you normally would to make a stitch. So pull it through like that, and that's sort of tying it in to the stitches and keeping it safe and making it look neat. So I'm going to go through another one. So I've got, see where I've got my hook there, just through some of the stitches at the back of the middle there. And then as the sort of thread gets shorter, it becomes more difficult because you can't hold on to it. So you can leave them even longer. And then pull through those 2 as well. And that should be enough. So I've gone through about 4 loops there. So that's nicely tucked in at the back. And then I'm going to snip that off as close to the blanket as possible. As close to the middle, sorry. And then snip, but just make sure you don't cut into your square or any of the stitches. That can be annoying when you've spent so much time on it. Like that. So we've got a nice neat back edge, a nice neat front. So what we're going to do now is join in our second colour to do the second round. So for the second round I'm going to use my pale pink, and I'm going to join in at the corner where I finished off. So wherever your thread tail is, join in at that corner, and then we're going to crochet it in. So remember I said that when you do that first chain you always have that sort of little gap. Let's move that out of the way. Have that sort of little gap between the stitches. So we've got 3 stitches there, and we've got a little gap there as well as our 4 corners. So make sure you're not going into that gap. So you want to make sure you're in the corner and not in the gap. And you can sort of do that just by counting the stitches. So there's 3 in each cluster. So 1, 2, 3. So I know that's not the gap. So come around there like that. And then put your thread over your hook and pull it through like that. And then we're going to tie that. So we're going to have 2 ends here to crochet in. So tie that like that, nice and tightly. Try and keep it in the corner. Oops. Pull it into the corner so that it's close to the where you started. Tight like that. Okay, so hold on to the tails like that. Put the hook through, and we're going to begin again with our chain of 3. I'm just going to move the camera up slightly because I feel like I'm a little bit close to the tripod. Okay, so we're going to start off then with that chain of 3. So hook behind the cotton and then pull that through. So that's 1, 2 and 3. And again, that makes up the first stitch of our first cluster. And in each corner we're going to do 2 clusters separated again by the 2 chains to make the corner. So again, come behind the cotton, through the corner, and then pick up your tail ends and put them over the top of the hook. See if I can show you that from the back. So you want them over the top of the hook, so we're actually enclosing them in the crochet. Okay, so let's just do that again. So there you've got your chain of 3, cotton behind, hook behind the cotton, and then put the ends over the hook like that at the back, so that we're going to be enclosing them in. And then you want to pull your cotton through so that you've got your 3 loops on the hook. And this is where I talked about how it sort of all gets twisted. So that just looks like a little cluster sitting on the hook there, and the hoops have actually moved to the back. So just sort of gently manoeuvre them so that you can actually see your loops. So then go behind the cotton through 2 and through 2, and then we've got 2 stitches of the first cluster. So I'm going behind the cotton again, through the corner, under the threads, and then pull through, so you've got your 3 loops, through 2 of them, so you've got 2 there, and through that 2. And then if I just show you the back, see what we're doing, we're actually crocheting in those cotton ends. Just pull that one up like that. And we're going to continue to crochet them in with the next cluster as well. So we're going to do that little corner again of 2, chain of 2. So 1 and 2, behind the cotton, through the corner, making sure the tails are above the hook so that we're crocheting them in or catching them in, and then pull your thread through. Again, you've got your 3 on there, so tidy them up, just give them a little jiggle so you've got the 3 visible to you. Then go through 2 and the final 2, and then we're going to do 2 more stitches to make that second cluster of 3. And see where it's not going through now, or I'm having trouble pulling it through, is because I was pulling the cotton too tightly. So if I just loosen off a little bit, then I can get them through more easily. Oops, tripod just slid off the desk there. Let me get back into position. So then we want to do one more to make that cluster of 3. Again, I'm catching in the loose threads at the back, pulling it through, giving it a wiggle to get it nicely on my hook. And I'm going through 2 loops and through the final 2. So we'll worry about cutting off the cotton at the end, but now you can forget about it and just leave it at the back of your work. Now, when you're doing normal sized crochet, here you would do 1 chain to take you into the next corner. But I find with mini crochet that it keeps the square firstly squarer and neater if you don't do that single chain between your corners, or between each cluster, as you'll see when we move on to the 3rd round. So I'm not going to do a chain here, I'm just going to go behind the thread and then straight into that next corner, so into my 2nd corner, and we're going to do the same thing again. So 2 clusters of 3 divided by 2 chains to make a nice sharp corner. So same thing again here. My hook's hitting on the leg of the tripod, so if we go sort of flying off again, that's why. It's quite difficult to do around a camera, but I'm just hoping that you can see more clearly what I'm doing this time. And then our corner of 2 chains, and then the 2nd cluster of 3. So that's 2 and 3. Like that. So again, we're ignoring those ends. We're just going to go behind the thread and directly into the next corner and do your 2 clusters again. Two clusters of 3 divided by a chain of 2 to create a nice corner. I feel I missed a stitch there, and if you feel it hasn't gone right, always just undo it like that and then go back into your loop. Sometimes that can happen, especially when you sort of start crocheting quite quickly. You sometimes go through all 3 together, or you miss one altogether, and you will notice it because the cluster will look quite baggy. So corner of 2 again. I'm just going to do this one, and then I'm going to do the same in that final corner, and then I'll come back to actually cast off because I want to get this tripod into a better position. My hand is actually resting against this leg on the right hand side, which is making me move further away. So I'll get it into a better position. And I'll see you back here at that final corner. Okay, so that's the 4 lots of double clusters done with the 2 chain stitches in the corners, and again we're now going to cast off the cotton. So I'm not going to do a chain this time because I find that it makes that final chain space a little bit baggy, so we're just going to join again into that 3rd stitch of that first chain of 3 that we did. So pick that up on your hook like that, and then just behind the cotton and pull it through the 2. And then you want to pull it quite tight there so that you haven't got a sort of baggy stitch there. So pull out a loop and snip off your cotton and then knot that off. Like that. Again, push it down with your nail so you keep that nice and tight as well. And there's our centre and our second round. So we're going to ignore this final thread where we joined off and see how we neatly crocheted those two in behind the back there, and that is now enough to hold those into place. You can snip those off close to where they sort of come out of that double cluster. Again, being really careful not to cut through the work or any of the stitches at the back there. So snip them off like that. Now we've got a nice neat back and front. So now we're going to do the same thing again. I'm actually going to join in that centre. So what we're going to do now, if I show you again that finished square, is our third round, and each time we're just increasing the clusters. So this time we'll have a cluster in the centre there. I'll just lay that on there, as well as doing those corners as we've done them now with both rounds. And we're going to start in that centre so we can crochet in that loose thread, and then we'll work our way round as we did before. So let's join in our next colour. I'm going to go for this lovely green. This green goes really nicely with any shade of pink. So pull your next thread through. Again, knock that off. Keep those two thread ends together. Hook through. And we're going to do that chain of 3 again. 1, 2, 3. Behind the thread, through, and so that you're picking up both of the loose threads there. So your needle should be below them, or your hook rather should be below them. And then you'll pull that through. So you've got your 3 stitches on your hook, or 3 loops. Go through 2, and through 2, and the same thing again. So we're going to do a cluster of 3 in there. Like that. So this time we've only gone over the loose threads with 1 cluster. So we're going to put those to one side, but then we'll pull them through with our crochet hook at the back, just to make them a little bit more secure. Now, as before, I'm not going to do a single chain to get into the corner. So the only place we're doing chains is at the corners, where we're doing a chain of 2. Everywhere else we're just going into the next chain space. So in between all these sort of single clusters of 3, we don't do a chain. If you just remember that you do them at the corners, that's an easy way to remember it. So again, just your double clusters in the corners and a single in all the other chain spaces, or a single cluster of 3 rather. 2 chains in the corner, and that's how we're going to build up the square. So again, to get into that next chain space, I'm not going to do a chain. I'm just going to go behind the cotton and straight in, and then do a single cluster of 3. So my battery has just started flashing, so I'll work my way around this square, and I'll meet you back again at that final corner to cast off. So again, I'm going into that 3rd chain of that first chain of 3 we did, like that, pulling the cotton through. Pull it nice and tightly so you've not got a sort of baggy space between the clusters. Pull out your cotton, snip off, and then tie into a knot. Pull that nice and tightly with your nail. Leave that one, and then with these 2 We've only gone through one cluster this time, so I am just going to pull them through a stitch at the back there. So again, I've got my 4mm hook here, so slightly smaller hook. I'm going to go through a couple of those pink loops there from the next cluster, and then pull those through. Like that. And then again I'm going to snip off close to that cluster. Careful not to go through any of my work. Like that. Again, that one will be picked up in our next round, and I'll be joining in that hole directly below the loose thread. So really now we're just doing the same thing again, and on this next round we'll have 2 single clusters of 3 along the edge rather than just the one. So you see, once you sort of know that basic pattern, you're just doing the same thing on each round. And this time I'm going to join back in my central colour. So I'll get rid of my smaller hook there. That's something else I've done as well, started using the smaller hook because I didn't check what I was doing. So I'm back with my 5mm now, my number 22. So join on again. You're always starting in the same way with your chain of 3. And then picking up those loose threads inside the cluster. And then you might think we'll just go across again with your loose threads, but if you sort of pull them across like that with the intention of then putting them in under the second cluster, you tend to be able to see them through the chain space when the square is complete. So do just sort of tie them in with the one cluster there, and then we'll you know, hook them in at the back at the end rather than trying to go through your next cluster. Okay, so I'll continue around again, and again I'll see you at that final corner to cast off. Okay, so I'm back at the beginning now, and again going to cast off. Pull that nice and tightly, and then change to my smaller hook to pull those through at the back. Like that, and then I'm going to snip those off. So a 4 round square is a nice size for a blanket. I like to do 5 if I'm putting it on a double bed, but if you wanted something that looks a little bit smaller, then 4 rounds, it, like I say, makes a nice blanket, and it's nice perhaps to hang over the back of a chair or a sofa, or maybe for a single bed or something like that. And the size of the 4 round square, if I just bring in my smaller rule, is 15mm, which is 5/8 of an inch. But I am actually going to add another round to this one, and I'm going to finish off with a white border. So I've got here a 20-gram ball of the white cotton. Now, unfortunately, they only do the larger balls in the white and the ecru. I wish they did them in the black, because I use the black as well for a lot of outlining, and it would be good to get a really big ball of that as well. Now, I haven't actually said where these are available from, and there's a lovely website called claireslace.co.uk, and I'm going to link to that below, and you can get all of the cotton from there, the scissors and the hooks as well. And there is the completed granny square. Now for a double bed, I like to make a blanket that is 6 by 4 squares, so 24 squares in total. So I'm going to go away now and make a few more squares. I think I've got about 6 or 7 complete. Now, a little while ago, I did actually put a post out on Facebook asking what sort of crochet videos you would like to see, and a lot of you asked for a video on joining the squares together. So once I've made my 24 squares, I'll be back with a tutorial on joining the squares together and completing the blanket. So do keep an eye out for that as well. I really hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial, and if you haven't done miniature crochet before, I hope that this video will inspire you to have a go. And if you do have a go at making a granny square, whether you've done it before or not, I would love to see your photographs, and you can share them in my Facebook group, Little Bits and Pieces by You. And if you're not already a member, just head over to my Facebook page where you can request to join. And I look forward to seeing your work. But that's it for today. I've got another Doll's House Diary coming up soon, so I'll see you then. Take care. Bye.